If you've never heard of the name Jane Austen in your entire life, then you must be living under a rock. The late 18th to early 19th century writer is everywhere today in society. Barnes & Noble has an entire section of all 6 novels with different covers, illustrations, and annotations, and even has the matching coloring books. The new Bridget Jones sequel that was recently released in theaters is loosely based off of Pride and Prejudice and even has Colin Firth, the 1995 B.B. Darcy, playing Mark Darcy. A not-so-subtle nod at the book, but nevertheless, these examples clearly illustrate the cultural impact that Jane Austen has had, even though it has been 200 years since her novels were printed. But what was she like in her days? Was she the J.K. Rowling of her time, where her fame has transcended generations? Or was her name just that, an English name that had no celebrity-like ties to it? These questions and many more are at the focal point of celebrity studies. Through examinations of celebrities at her time, Jane Austen was merely a face among the crowd. But her fame began to grow slowly after her death, until the mid-1800s, when an explosion of literary critics desperately wanted to give their 2 cents on the writings of Jane Austen. It was through the lack of self-proliferation and the promotion of her writing posthumously by others that ultimately led Jane Austen to become a celebrity and a household name. On December 16, 1775, the literary genius Jane Austen was born to a family that would eventually have 8 children. Her sister Cassandra was her closest friend, and letters shared between both parties would eventually be published. The bond between the two is often the scope of literary analysis, as it is well known that Cassandra was Jane's closest friend. Out of all her brothers, she was closest to Henry, who would later become her literary agent. In general, her family was part of the gentry, which is a term used to describe those in good social position. Her life was once considered uneventful, but this was not the case, as Austen was fairly busy and had to make time to write her novels. As to her love life, all that is known is that Austen was once engaged for less than a day, as she would terminate the engagement to a family friend. I guess she beat Kim Kardashian in being in a relationship for the shortest time. From 1811 to 1815, a span of 4 years, Austen would publish 4 novels, in chronological order. Her first novel was Sense and Sensibility, followed by Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park, and Emma. All were highly acclaimed at the time, but unfortunately Austen did not receive the fame due to the fact that her novels were published anonymously. In 1817, Austen fell ill and would eventually die at the age of 41. After her death, Henry and Cassandra would publish Northanger Abbey and Persuasion. Literary success and fame would be bestowed upon Austen in the following centuries, as critics like Sir Walter Scott and A.C. Bradley would write reviews that brought Austen and her novels into such intense study that to this day her works are analyzed to every theory known to man. In order to study Jane Austen and determine what makes her a celebrity, I discovered the use of 3 different analytical approaches, all of which were founded by a man named Chris Rojek and then built upon by many other writers. A small side note, there are some who study celebrities and find it hard to use modern vocabulary of our celebrity culture to the celebrity culture of the 18th century. Thus, finding a theory that worked was a challenge at first. However, these 3 approaches are universal in study and can be used for any celebrity. The first approach, the subjectivist, focuses on the inherent talent of the star. Joseph Roach, a familiar name, has been the biggest contributor to this idea in his analysis of it. Roach and many others look at the celebrity appeal of an individual as they cross the threshold of becoming famous. The second approach, the structuralist, focuses on forces beyond the control of the celebrity that help shape their identity. Simply stated, is the economic forces that help propel someone into becoming a celebrity. Finally, the third approach is the post-structuralist. The post-structuralist approach focuses on the celebrity. The production, the image, and the consumption of the celebrity is the main focus of this approach. In short, the study of celebrities requires us to look at the individual, the industry, and the audience. Let's begin with subjectivists. The subjectivist approach focuses on the inherent talent of the star. Jane Austen's talent as a writer can be found in her brilliant display of human relationships and the way she writes her novels. A major theme in all her works is human relationship, and oftentimes those relationships are among family members. Instead of being superficial with the relationships, Austen dives deeper to show the true connections of the human soul. When one character is in distress, it is easy to see that reflected in other characters, and Austen wrote the book on that. Well, actually 6, but you get the joke. Her study on family relationships and other types of relationships can even be found on the sociological level and is yet another reason why people love her novels. Austen embraced all types of relationships and demonstrated that these aspects of love, life, and family were vital to human existence. It is often pointed out that the time that Austen lived in was filled with strife and war, and yet, unlike many authors at her time, she turned away from that genre because she easily showed that strife could be found in everyday living. Another inherent talent of Austen's writing was not only found in the relationships between those on the page, but between the characters and the reader. It is not just the relationships among her characters that she is focused on. She also pays equal attention to the establishment of relationships among her characters and readers. While reading her novels, it is easy to root for the main character and form prejudices towards the antagonist. In the case of Pride and Prejudice, by reading the novel for the first time and only seeing it through the lens of Elizabeth, it is easy for the reader to be prejudiced against Darcy. However, by the end of the novel, when all is revealed, both Elizabeth and the reader go through a character transformation. The lessons learned by the characters are lessons taught to the reader. It is through these epiphanies do we form relationships with the characters, as we see them more than just names in a book. Finally, Austen's approach to storytelling involved her long-held control over text, which allowed her to build more than just a story, but a community of lifelike people. Austen's long-held control over text is one of the things that generates the unusual feeling of life going on them, states Harman, and which has helped them make them so vivid and believable to generations of readers. That sense of Austen being for us and for our time is one of her most appealing attributes. The structuralist approach focuses on the forces beyond the control of the celebrity that help shape the celebrity's identity. The focus on literary celebrities is the version in which their stories are told. In her article, Wanko states that increasing literacy and the active presses expanded readership and were crucial developments. The lack of this development would have kept Austen's name in the dark and at most made her a local celebrity, one that would have been lost in the passing of time if it wasn't for the help of her brother and other influential writers who helped to build her image after her death, a point that will be elaborated on later in the video. Another aspect of the structuralist approach is mobility of the image and how it can pass through different tongues and cultures. Austen's narrowness has paradoxically been a major factor in her global mobility. This narrowness allowed her novels to be translated into multiple languages, ones that I've never heard of, as her books were adapted into movies and miniseries. These movies and miniseries adaptations were just another force that helped Austen in her image posthumously. The post-structuralist approach focuses on the celebrity's image, production, and consumption, and the audience that consumes within the culture of icons and celebrities. While we like to elaborate on Austen's stories and apply different lenses of analyses to understand her writing better, it can be simply said that her stories were love stories. The main reason for Austen's mass popularity, therefore, is one from which the critics tended to avert their eyes: the love stories. Austen's production of stories that describe love that crossed social classes and ages were easily relatable to those who experienced such feelings, as well as those who wanted to understand that kind of strife. The middle-aged, the middle class, and those who consider themselves slightly above the middle brow are Austen's natural constituency. They, actually we, love Austen, the idea as much as the books, because she comes from our own ranks and rocks no boats. With Austen, we know that we are never going to be taken to extremes. This quote, summarized by Harman in her book, summarizes the post-structural approach for Austen. These three approaches are important in understanding the social construct behind a celebrity. The significance of Jane Austen is so personal and so universal, so intimately connected with our sense of ourselves and of our whole society, that it is impossible to imagine a time when she or her works could have delighted us enough. Harman once again has taken the words right out of my mouth. With Austen, her novels are so personal and intimate that reading them brings us closer to various ideals. More importantly, they bring us closer to ourselves. A point made by Harman earlier on in her novel that I found interesting is that Austen didn't seem like an obvious candidate for mass popularity in the late 19th century or the late 20th. She wasn't a celebrity during her time because the public had not been whipped into a frenzy by Austen Leigh's memoir or by A Man in a Wet Shirt. After these two occurrences, however, Austen exploded onto the scene as a player, in the words of Shakespeare, and unlike most of her counterparts, her exit is not foreseeable in the near-distant future. Unlike many celebrities, Austen was not one for proliferating her image. Her image at the time was local, and friends of friends had known that she was the author of her novels, while the mass public did not. This, however, did not stop Austen from being critical of her writing in the way the public perceived it. Harman states that Austen knew that her own works were good as, if not a great deal better than, most of the titles in the circulating library, and everything suggests that she had both hoped and expected to see one of her novels in print someday. This was around the time that her first novel was being published after being edited multiple times. Due to her extensive reading skills, Austen quickly discovered her form of writing that was best suited for consumption. While she didn't necessarily care if she was misread, she was more preoccupied with not being read at all. Although Austen did not proliferate her image while she was alive, she proliferated the prose of her novel, which in the end was an extension of her mind. Jane Austen's image after her death was greatly improved by her siblings and a multitude of writers that came after her time. An example of the proliferation of image by others can be found in David Garrick, who was a good friend of Samuel Johnson. I guess everything is connected in the end somehow with this class. The regulation of his image was seen through publications about him, who wrote those publications and why, and finally how his friends, colleagues, and patrons adjusted his image. Thus Garrick's image was related to the image that others had seen. When her novels were officially published with her name, Austen's brother Henry had written a eulogy to go along with it. This eulogy perked the interest of readers as they tried to get closer to Austen and her image. Her letters between her and her sister helped to reveal that, like her characters, Austen had a profound love for familial relationship. Richard Bentley, a famous scholar, reprinted her works in 1833 as part of his standard novel series. Sir Walter Scott praised Austen for her finely written novel Pride and Prejudice and how she paid attention to her characters and their relationships. It was through these critiques and praises that helped Austen's image become world-renowned decades after her death. An interesting side note was the names and profiles of those written in her novels. Through historical analysis and criticism, many scholars determined that the names she used were historical figures and people from the upper class. Austen was fascinated with these high-profile names and decided to embrace the celebrity associations with them. By affiliating her novels with these associations, Austen immersed herself into her time's celebrity culture, which would later be known as the Deep 18th Century, a term coined by Roach as the period in which the it factor emerged. It brings Austen's novels into a different perspective, one that gives her reader another reason to reread her novels. Austen's reputation after her death has been constantly built upon accomplishments, most of which were out of her control. Recently in England, thousands of fans signed a petition calling for Austen to be put on the currency instead of Churchill, who, might I add, seems to be a celebrity figure of England still to this day. The only other woman on the face of a bill in England is Queen Elizabeth II. For many women today, this illustrated that the only way to get ahead in life was to be born in the right family. Austen will be placed on the 10-pound note with the quote, "I declare, after all, there is no enjoyment like reading." This new development illustrates that Austen can never be out of date because she was never in any particular date. Another reason for her increased name recognition after her death was due to the increase in film and television adaptations of her novels. This began 15 years ago with the BBC's miniseries Pride and Prejudice. Austen's novels also inspired a boom in literature and romantic comedy films during this time as well. Women at this time were delaying marriage and were so fearful of not finding a husband that they turned to Austen for help. Her novels became reading guides on finding Mr. Right. Austen is often heralded as a pro-Shakespeare by 19th century critics, a technique that she has practiced on since her early writings. She was gifted with the talent of fusing her characters' voices with her narrators. Thus the style we call free and direct discourse, says Daniel Pollock-Pelzer in his article, is a signal achievement of novelistic representation, which is linked to a means for representing Shakespeare in narrative form. The prose Shakespeare was writing Shakespearean prose. In a famous 1859 appraisal, one that helped build her image, Lewes judged that in her ability to reveal characters through their own speeches, that Austen had never been surpassed, not even by Shakespeare himself. And yes, while comparing her literary accomplishments to a man may not make some people happy, I think it helps to point out that what men can do, women can do as well, and in some cases even better. Austen's literary accomplishments remind me of J.K. Rowling. Both women were able to write in their own ways that make them unique, allowing them to interact with a bigger audience. We see this in Rowling's case as well, as most of her readers are in college or in the real world, and yet her books are still being consumed by young children today. The interaction between Austen's works and her audience is a unique one to say the least. The concept of public intimacy, a term developed by Roach, who basically developed celebrity studies by himself, involves the spectators feeling that they have a special relationship with the celebrity. This conceived notion of a special relationship is then used for commercial reasons. Her books are constantly reprinted with different illustrations and book covers, striking a similarity to the marble covering in the books we looked at in the library. It's not just enough to get the books, but to get the best-looking version of the book. Jane Austen Regency tea parties are the summer bashes in most parts of England, and bonus points if you dress up in 18th century attire. The Jane Austen Centre is a permanent exhibit that offers tours and refreshments in the Regency tea room. It is not enough to read her novels these days, as many people want to immerse themselves into the culture and hope to interact with Austen on a personal level. In summary, Austen's novels and their deep connections of human relationship helped make her a celebrity. By using Chris Roget's three analytical approaches, it is easy to see what makes Jane Austen so special. Jane Austen was not a big celebrity during her time and was only known locally. The lack of self-proliferation and promotion of her writing posthumously by others helped build her image as people wanted to learn more about her as the years passed. Her accomplishments are still occurring to this day, as she was recently added to the 10-pound note. The successive movie and television adaptations of her books have also boosted name recognition. Jane Austen, kicking male writers' asses and taking names since 1775.